Count Crowley is an ongoing series of comics that began in 2019, written by David Desmalchian and illustrated by Lucas Kettner with colors by Lauren Aff and letters by Frank Chevetnik. It's published by Dark Horse Comics. Desmalchian is better known as an actor in Prisoners, Animals, and most recently Late Night with the Devil, with Crowley being his first published work. Kettner has been illustrating comics for over 10 years, with his first work being Witch Doctor. The series is currently divided into 3 different books, each composed of 4 issues, as well as a one-off convention special. The first is Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter, then Amateur Midnight Monster Hunter, and most recently, Mediocre Midnight Monster Hunter. The series follows Jerri, an alcoholic reporter for a local news station who gets introduced to the world of the supernatural via her role as a late-night horror presenter in the style of Joe Bob Briggs or Elvira. It's a love letter to Hammer horror, EC Comics in the 1980s, while still dealing with modern ideas and themes. It's intelligently written, with likable characters, decent lore without being too exposition-heavy, and a good pace to the plot. The artists stand out as well, with some incredible full-page spreads, along with some nice detail and even the more basic frames. The colors are rich, with lots of grays, blues, and greens, and oranges, invoking a very Halloween-y feel. The first issue begins with Jerri in her full Count Crowley outfit, with a bottle of whiskey in one hand, something that will be a very frequent image, especially early on. Her addiction is treated respectfully and with a good amount of weight. Later on she begins to attend AA meetings, but there's still a realistic depiction of withdrawal, and at a certain point she relapses after being reminded of past trauma, something a lot of alcoholics deal with. In a lot of media, drinking is treated as a character quirk. Someone drinks but then still gets on with their work. Hard-nosed detectives or grizzled action heroes. While this portrayal has changed more in recent years, there's still some reluctance to show just how devastating it can be, and Count Crowley doesn't hold back. Her drinking causes Jerri to lose her job, almost lose her apartment, and sink completely into depression. Before all of that happens, however, she encounters someone who claims that he was supposed to help her, although it's not yet revealed who he is. The character design here is great, as this unfortunate gentleman is a werewolf, and he shifts under the unearthly light. The comic then jumps back a day to a Renaissance fair with Jerri, in much more respectable clothes, is covering. Of course, immediately after establishing the location, it cuts to her drinking straight from a box of wine, again showing how debilitating her alcoholism is. I like the way the background of the TV segment has no color to show the depth of field. There's a lot of little touches in the art that make it entertaining to look at. Unfortunately, while she calls out the Ren Fair owner on his cheap wine, she does so while insulting the entire town, and, like Ron Burgundy, it gets her fired. She claims she wasn't drunk at the time, but the wine stains on her teeth tell a different story. We then get a scene establishing that her brother runs the station, and that their relationship is loving but strained, with her addiction really driving a wedge. He still wants to support her, and offers her a job of Count Crowley, which she refuses. There's some hints that she wants to be a respected journalist, and maybe was at some point, before something happened. She then hops into her car, bottle of whiskey in hand, and then drives away. In her apartment we see there are moving boxes, half a dozen empty bottles, as well as some unpaid bills. TV is also blaring, talking about the Soviet Union as a reminder of what time period the comics is set in, the late 1980s. Her brother calls offering care and support, and she reacts by running away. This is a reaction to many obstacles in her real life, especially relationships with people. On the other hand, she takes initiative and investigates the supernatural occurrences, diving headfirst into them. She is a problem-solver personality, but, like many of that persuasion, is unwilling or unable to do anything about her own issues. She leaves drinking at home for drinking at a bar when she hooks up with the first man who offers. This entire experience is over in 3 panels, showing how little that kind of encounter means to her. It's another release, just like drinking, but ultimately as a method of avoidance. When she returns home, the landlord, who seems to be stuck a decade in the past, reminds her that she's a month late on rent. Because of this, she is forced to take the job of Count Crowley, as things have escalated past the point she can ignore. The film that she ends up presenting is the amusingly titled Jesse James Meet Frankenstein's Daughter, a send-up of the Abbott and Costello films from the 40s. Instead of sticking to the script about the film, however, she negs the audience, dumps on the picture, and in general is much more antagonistic than the typical host. This, naturally, results in a huge increase in audience. The first issue ends on a cliffhanger right where it began, with a werewolf lunging at Jerri. It also includes a summary of the situation by Friar Fear, one of several EC Comics-esque characters, although with a few less puns. There's also a selection of mail-order products. Some seem to be taken directly from the 1950s with no changes, but there are a few unique ones like Gen X-ray specs, They're Just Shrimp, and a Donald Trump monster mask. The next issue begins right where the last one left off, with a nice-looking, almost full-page spread. After a brief chase scene, she's able to fight off the werewolf and flee to her car, eventually shooting the beast before collapsing. Jimmy, a cop, finds her. although he goes by James in an attempt to be taken seriously. He has a lot of similarities to Dewey from the Scream series. It's clear that he has something of a crush on Jerri and lets her off for drinking and driving, as well as a likely unlicensed revolver. Jerri returns back to the station and shows her preferred style of searching for things, dumping everything in a big clump, then hoping something relevant shows up. This seems like a small thing, but helps inform her character. Similarly, while searching, she finds a photograph of her in her youth, holding a junior journalist trophy. It's clear she was driven to get her career in the industry, and it invites questions about how she ended up back in her small town. Her brother confronts her about drunk driving, and then we get a bit more information about the relationship between them and Jimmy. Jerri then again runs away, first avoiding the situation by recalling old stories, then physically leaving, and of course, drinking. It would seem like an event like hallucinating a werewolf or nearly crashing her car would be a wake-up call, but for her, and many alcoholics, a single incident isn't enough. She feels guilty about abandoning her career and ending up back in her hometown, and although it may have made sense at the time, it gnaws at her. That, combined with money troubles and no social circle, means drinking is her only escape, and anyone offering to take that away is effectively a threat to her happiness. It's certainly not an accident that as she is driving down the road drinking, there is a huge billboard advertising booze of some kind. A big part of the difficulty that alcoholics face is how ubiquitous it is. Other addicts may be reminded of what they're trying to quit occasionally, but beer and wine are everywhere, from grocery stores to gas stations, and there's advertising on the radio, TV, and plastered on walls. It's everywhere. It makes quitting even harder than it already is. After jotting down the address of the previous Count Crowley, Jerri engages in a little bit of breaking and entering. To continue the Halloween theme of the comic, she discovers a bunch of pumpkins. Unfortunately, the owner has been gone for a while, and they're rotting, like Halloween 3 instead of Halloween. Similarly, she is surprised by Cat Jump Scare, a classic of the horror genre. The cat seems to be supernaturally intelligent, pointing her to a hidden key in the book, The Road to Madness, a collection of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. The most notable story in the collection is what would eventually become Reanimator, but it also features At the Mountains of Madness and Dagon. Inside the locked room, she discovers a study and listens to some voice recorders from the man who would turn into a werewolf, as well as another location to go, Atrium Gardens, a retirement home. Unfortunately, she is not alone, and she encounters a Frankenstein's monster-esque creature who bashes right through a booby trap. She manages to briefly escape, but again the issue ends in a cliffhanger, with the monster smashing through the car window. There's another great splash page with the horror host, Sister Sylvia. As with most cliffhangers, the situation is resolved immediately in the next issue, with Jerri slicing off the beast's hand with a whiskey bottle. After such a harrowing experience, she heads to the one place that'll help, a liquor store, again reinforcing the themes of Jerri's dependence on alcohol. Being unable to pay, she tries to swipe some to sate her addiction, but is caught and half arrested. It seems the town only has one police officer, and given their own friends, she's allowed to walk away. While she's in the back of the car, there's a textless panel that brings up a new theme. A stereotypical nuclear family drives past. The mother and father offer judgmental stares, while the children smile and wave. This could be because she's in a cop car, or because she's still dressed like Count Crowley, but either way, being weird or different is something to be scorned by adults, but accepted by kids. Desmalchian is a lifelong horror fan, and I'm sure he received his fair share of snide comments due to that. Jerri attempts to get her brother's help, but after admitting to several crimes, including cat theft, she's left out cold. His wife similarly berates Jerri, and while it's her first appearance, it's understand this is not the first time he's had to rescue Jerri. It's then revealed that Jerri stole a second bottle of alcohol, but managed to hide it from not only the store owner, but the cop and her brother. She jests about it, but it's similar to BoJack Horseman, where the drinking is a huge problem, and everyone except for her acknowledges it, and has been hurt by it. Jerri heads to the retirement home to find Vincent Price, whose first name obviously references Vincent Price, although his last doesn't seem to be new and notable in the horror genre. His room is a shrine to horror, including a number of pumpkins just like the old Count's house. He initially plays the part of a senile old man, before throwing Lugosi milk into her face, ensuring she's not some kind of specter or spook. After this is a long exposition scene talking about the great fight in good versus evil and the appointed, the ones chosen to fight in the darkness. Unlike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, however, the chosen ones are not female, as the old man is incredibly sexist and dismisses Jerri entirely. His tune gradually changes, but the initial impressions are rough for someone who's going to be a fairly major character. Using her just demonstrated pickpocket skills, however, Jerri steals a sacred book, which contains some impressive illustrations and even more lore. She hears about someone who was attacked by a wild animal on the radio and goes to investigate. While she's stonewalled by the only cop in town, this scene has some very nice sunset lighting. The issue ends with her sneaking around the back and taking a look at the corpse, and a summary by Fire of Fear. That corpse ends up being the thing that puts her over the edge, and she decides to actually attend AA. Unfortunately, her past life is still haunting her, and she's not able to seek the help that she really needs. So again, instead of trying to confront her problems, she retreats into another world, trying to solve the mystery of the werewolf. This ties into her being a journalist and having the drive to find out the reasons behind things, but is still ultimately putting her own issues on the back burner. Even that gets interrupted by a call from her old boss, who is the reason she had to leave her dream job, as they raped her at a party. She immediately goes into a trauma response, unable to speak properly, and going back to her unhealthy coping mechanisms with alcohol and casual sex. During a flashback, there's a painting on the wall of what seems to be Desire from Sandman comics, which have similar themes to what's tackled here. Next, a boardroom of chain-smoking men tells her what has happened was her fault and that she is being punished for it. Even before that, she mentions she didn't report it to the police because it would be bad for the station. She's already taken actions to cover it up, because that's what she believed she was supposed to do. This is tied together with Victor's sexism to show how women were treated in male-dominated industries, and just in general. When she returns to Victor and demands information about killing monsters, both human and otherwise, she gets a lore dump about how a coven of vampires is looking to infiltrate the media and control the information. Victor offers her an axe that resembles the scythe from Buffy, and heads off to kill the ghoul, called a Billy. There's a decent fight scene, and she succeeds in dismembering him, before making up with her brother, promising sobriety. In general, she gets back into it, and it seems like things might work out. Then, because the story always has to continue, the werewolf shows up in her AA meeting, and a final stinger with a vampire receiving a letter saying only, Count Crowley. Overall, the first collection of the comic is fairly strong. It establishes the world, a few main characters, and some interesting thematic components. The 80s setting feels well developed, and not just an excuse not to have cell phones. Finally, the art and writing are both top-notch, with some really impressive splash panels. Reluctant Midnight Monster Hunter is the first of the 3 Count Crowley books, which I'll be covering, so let me know if you enjoyed this one and would like other comic reviews. Thank you for watching, and be well.